Today, we're here to talk about executive thought leadership on social media, which is something we've been asked about a lot over the years. And let me start with you, Lisa. Let's say you get a new business call and somebody is saying that we want to make sure our executives are better on social media than they have been. Where's your mind go, like right out of the gate?
How many executives is the
Yep.
first thing. When you say executives, I'm thinking, how many do you have on your team? And do you actually mean multiple, or do you mean just one or two? Because every executive social media strategy is very unique to the person to some degree. Although there can be times that I know that we've done audits and reviews, and Taylor knows this, of a 15 or 20 person leadership team. It can be done. It's just sometimes you're wondering, that's where my head goes, is how many and what are similar about them? What are different from them? What are their roles? Those are the types of questions that come to mind.
I
Taylor,
think to
when you
add to
do,
Lisa's
yeah, go ahead.
just to add to Lisa's point, I think it's all the second question is how familiar are they with social? Because sometimes you have these executive leaders that uh, are more savvy or more apt to comment or even engage with the brand profile, and others who have other people doing their social for them and don't know the first thing about how to engage.
Yeah, I remember you guys did one. It was a large B2B brand, and they had, I don't know, 10, 15 executives. And what I thought was really clever is we, mostly you guys, we ranked them sort of on where they were. Like, did they even have a LinkedIn profile that was set up? Did they even tag their company in it? Did they ever post to, all the way up to, are they writing articles for, Business Week or whatever? And it was interesting that anyone, regardless of whether they were really good at it or just getting started, like everyone could make baby steps, right? Everyone could reshare content that's already being published by the brand. Other people could
Mm-hmm.
be creating brand new big thinking, big cranium kind of stuff. But there was something that everybody could do.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that was pretty intentional because, like, when we were looking at it, one was an HR executive, another might be a sales executive. And the reason why they weren't sharing or active in social was very unique to their person. And it's easy to kind of blanket and say, well, the executives are just busy. Every executive just has no time for social media. But there's always like a layer underneath it that when you start to understand and even hear from some of them, you hear firsthand that they're either they don't know where to start, is mostly, or they're scared of how they should be engaging with their other employees that might be underneath them. Like, there are just very fascinating instances of that. And I know, Taylor, you worked with a sales person who is worried about how his content may come across to his customers who are going through layoffs and things like that. Because if he's jet setting and showing all of, like, all the locations that he might of other customers that he might be whining and dining, then he felt like it was too showy. So he had content to share, but he was a little nervous that that wasn't the right content for the right audience. So a lot of them just felt like they just didn't know what to do or where to begin, or there were those little obstacles that they needed someone to help think through.
I think having that hesitation is already like a good first step because they're aware of the fact that there needs to be more than just signing on and being a part of one of these platforms. They know that there's some fences they might have to hop over before they get a consistent presence there. I worked at a university before Ignite, and one of the tasks that we had was trying to get our chancellor a social media presence. And it came down to several different things about why do you need this in the first place. It's always important to reevaluate that, but also what exactly do you want to get out of it? Like, who do you want to reach out to, and what do you want your presence to be? And does it even make sense for you to be there in the first place? Obviously it's going to be different with each institution, ways it could benefit you or ways it could bite you in the butt if you're not careful. But obviously answering those big questions is one of the first big steps you can take in moving forward with it.
I
I've been
think to that
told.
point with the baby steps that you were talking about, Jim, we also looked at what like a crawl, walk, run approach for multiple different executives, and similar to what Drew was just saying, being able to just start with that business profile optimization. Are you on the platform? Do you know how to have your profile optimized? Then you can move into liking and sharing and commenting, and then in that run phase, that is where you're getting into more thought leadership and original content. But being able to have those approaches within those baby steps also makes it seem more feasible.
I think the phrase thought leadership can be really paralyzing. I've been told over the years, do more thought leadership. It's like, okay, so I'm supposed to go to my desk and think big things.
And lead.
That's a hard little thing to put on your to-do list, right? But I think if you switch it around and think about, what have we already produced? What's meaningful? Like, why did we do that? There's so many places to take what you do for a living that other people, particularly if you're at all good at what you do for a living, you're thinking out about it at a deeper level than the average person.
That's interesting too, Jim, because you could even say, right, that this experience that we're doing right now is a form of thought leadership, and I don't think anyone on this call would set out today and be like, we're going to do a thought leadership segment, but it's an outflow or an overflow of our different expertise and questions that we get all the time. And so sometimes thought leadership, it's a big weighty phrase, but it's more about sharing the knowledge that you already have.
And to put less pressure on yourself, maybe as an exec or as a leader, I think one thing we did in my previous role, and I think one thing that makes sense to do if you're in that position, is to look at the kind of things you're going to talk about on your personal social media in content pillars, the way we treat brands. Maybe you take a little pressure off yourself of having to be an expert in everything you do, and you thoughtfully look at your spectrum of content that you're going to put out there. And maybe only a percentage of it is focused on your discipline, on your company. Maybe you're able to break it down a little bit more into general industry knowledge. Maybe you're able to break it down a little bit more into conversations like what we're having now, where you're teaching about best practices in your field. And then maybe there's a little sliver of the pie that's you living your everyday life, like Jim, you going to Coach K's basketball camp. I think that's a great example because it's a part of your feed in your role, but it's also part of your personal life. And obviously there's always a fine line, but being selective with what you share of that side of yourself builds that authenticity with the people that are following you and helps you stay connected to your business and the people you're communicating with.
Yeah, and one thing with the education piece, I think that's usually part of an executive presence or strategy or profile is kind of doing that audit on how people know these channels and how they know to engage with them. One of the things that we found pretty compelling is that on LinkedIn specifically, where a lot of the executive presence would be, that recent activity place was often either just completely inactive or people were engaging in content that as an executive they wouldn't always want everyone to see if you went to their profile. And so it got a little interesting because that on Facebook and that on Instagram, but when you're on LinkedIn, there's less of a knowledge, I think, about some of the features of LinkedIn. And because people might just be going there, looking through their feed and liking and commenting, but never taking a chance to step back and look at their own profile, and stepping back and saying, what can others see about me and my activity here? And what does that say about my company? What does it say about me personally? How can you develop a strategy that helps them understand that, but also then use it to their advantage? Because what Drew said about engaging in relevant industry conversations, if you do more of that, then you're going to come across more of your relevant decision makers and potential customers potentially, and that might be helpful part of the strategy to encourage people to know about.
And I feel like if so many marketing questions, they seem complex when I like to think of it as like you look forward. What should I do? You look forward, right? But I find so many of the answers are right behind you in the basic questions that we were asking ourselves in like marketing 101 classes. Like, what's my strategy? What's my goals? How will I know if my goals are being achieved? who's my audience? Those sort of questions. You just take a minute to think through, what does success look like, with whom. You can get to a lot of answers. And then the other marketing sort of tactic that comes up in this is exchange. Like, I want someone's time. What am I willing to give them in exchange for time? And in this, conversation, we're giving some thoughts on, for someone who's struggling with, my executive just asked me to create a better social media presence for them. We're
Right.
giving them ways to do that without ever coming to us, in exchange for their time. So I think those are the kinds of things that make it a little less paralyzing.
You guys think there's anything that this might be obvious, but you should potentially avoid? It's always kind of fun to talk about the other side of it, like the things that maybe you don't always think of. I mean, I think there's several baseline rules of social that should be followed, but what do you guys think?
I do think there are some executives that do not need a social media strategy for themselves, and that's okay. They can be a great executive. There could be a lot of work behind the scenes to get them to be able to be social, and maybe from a business standpoint, there's someone else on the executive leadership team that can play that role. And so when we looked across the 14 or 15, some roles were really obvious, like the HR executive should probably have a social presence because it can help you understand, things like culture of a company and how, what their thoughts are on recruiting, and what their culture of a workplace is, and how their executive team functions together and why you would want to work there. Like, there's a lot of residual goodness out of some of that. But then there's some roles where, when we're looking at it and certain personalities, there may be a prioritization of certain executives that need to be prioritized over others, especially at the beginning. And then if there are systems that can make it easier and lower that barrier for certain executives that have a harder time, or not the propensity to be that thought leader on the front lines, then they can at least share content from, the company pages, and they can at least like and engage with their colleagues, because that might be more safe, and it might also be something that is more likely for them to continue to do over the long term.
I think another
Taylor,
thing.
oh, I wanted to ask you, Taylor, about the resourcing angle, because like part of it, I think when you were saying, Drew, like anything you should avoid, it's like, not to me, I was thinking, well, don't create something that can't be sustained. If you're going to do a strategy, think about how it's going to be executed and look a little further down the road. And I remember you've worked with one specific executive to kind of lay that out. So are there anything that you learned from that discussion on how he planned to take that and run with it?
Yeah, I think it's a two-part answer. The first is going back all the way to the beginning, knowing why you're on social and what you're trying to accomplish. Because with this particular executive, there were lots of lofty goals, but in order to attain those goals, there was a team behind the executive that needed to carry them out. But then he needed the final say, and so it became a little bit of a bottleneck of what they wanted to put out on social, and it didn't even really get out in the way that they had originally intended, because there was almost too large of a goal that we had aligned on, but realistically, from a resourcing standpoint, there wasn't the boots on the ground, if you will, and that executive didn't necessarily have the time to take that large of a chunk. Whereas if we had focused potentially maybe solely on the sharing or the liking, but even still, some executives, like this was the case with this executive as well, they're not naturally a social person. So even the liking and the commenting and the sharing, which for us as social media marketers day in and day out seems easy, and you just get on once a day and like something, that was really hard for this executive, and it became more of a challenge just to do it. But then the interesting thing, this is another avoidant topic, and Lisa mentioned this earlier, especially on LinkedIn, is knowing where what you're liking, because that can be seen. And that's not like it's a horror story, could be a horror story, but even it was something as simple as liking a little goat fainting but it just in the middle of a B2B executive presence as the most recent activity, it kind of just doesn't fit. But the same, we also saw some other executives, for example, on Instagram, wondering should they have a private Instagram, because that you really use that just for their family and their friends, and they want to show the unfiltered raw life. But as an executive, you have the unfortunate burden of being all things to all people, and people are looking at you, and so that's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, but less than before. And I think it comes down to a personal thing. Like I
yeah,
sort of believe that who I am is who I am, and it's got the personal stuff. So like pretty much everything I share on Facebook is public and my Instagram is public. And that's fine with me. Now, if somebody else says, I'm going to lock up my Instagram, it's for my friends, that is totally fine. I think years ago it was my personal brand and my business brand. I think
yeah.
that's really blurred now if you're comfortable with it being blurred.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
I think it's blurred too in ways that it can backfire sometimes now with the world we're in and people having feelings about various things. And obviously, it's always good to avoid the classics like politics and religion. But sometimes things get touched on that are gray area, and you just obviously always are careful. But like I used to warn students I would work with in my previous job, anything you say on social media, it's always an important reminder to remember that it could be screenshot, it could be saved forever. Not to scare anyone, or I'm a very encouraging person. Get on social media if you want to get on social media, but just always remember that I had 3 rules for social, and I think they could apply to anyone. And the second rule is don't panic. The third rule is remember that anything can be saved. And the first rule is only the first rule because it makes sense as the first rule, and it's don't tweet nudes. I think if that one didn't exist, it wouldn't be the first rule. That one's obvious, obviously, but I don't know. I think there's ways around it too. I think, if you're not quite comfortable to have that social media presence that's public, you can work with your team to find out how you can have a presence online in a little more controlled fashion to be those first steps. Maybe there's an AMA opportunity, and Ask Me Anything opportunity through your company's social media channels, Instagram, stickers, LinkedIn. Maybe there's an opportunity for a content series that features the human side of you as an exec, shows you interacting with employees, shows you interviewing other thought leaders in the space, not to get meta with this conversation. But there are other ways to be involved with social if you want to take a small step before you're the person behind the keys, tweeting and liking and retweeting.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is being candid with either yourself or having someone on your team who's willing to be candid and what you're good at and what you're not good at. I think some people are really good writers, like, oh yeah, I can bang out 1,000 words in 30 minutes, and other people that would take them 8 hours and they agonize over that. And I think if you give someone something to do that they're going to agonize over, it's just not going to survive. To Lisa's earlier point, and I remember, Guy, early on when we were 2007, 2008, the early OG social media marketers trying to get together and talk about these things. And there was one guy, very smart. I always felt like he was 2 or 3 steps ahead. But he did video all the time. And he was terrible on video. And he looked bad. And he sounded
This is
bad.
probably me right now when people
No,
watch
it's
my
not you. It was
videos.
not you. But you had to get past the way he sounded to be like, hey, there's something really smart there. If he could have found another way to convey that, I think it would have been better for his personal brand.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, my struggles with video just in general, so I resonate with that, even though I am begrudgingly on here. but but you wrote me into a format that was a lot easier for me, so I do think that you have a point there. And to your other point about people who really know you, like it in the strategy process for executives, there's typically always a support of an executive
Yeah.
somewhere, somehow, especially if they're truly, at a larger company. They probably have someone who's supporting them, like an executive assistant or someone that really is in that day to day and can see their strengths, their weaknesses, their hobbies, their passions, and having that person involved in the upfront discovery process, if you're going to be doing a social media strategy, is super helpful to make sure that the strategy for the executive makes sense. I don't think it's good to just blanket a social media strategy for all executives to follow. I think you need to tailor it at least a little bit. In the one we did for 15, we were doing a broad audit and we figured out how we could move people along a spectrum. So it was a little bit easier to look at that spectrum and say, you're right here and you need to be right there. But in terms of giving very tangible, proactive content that we think that these people need to be producing, when it comes to that, the people that know them best are helpful at weighing into that content strategy. And it's very similar to what you were saying, Drew, about thinking about all the different types of topics that may be helpful and having a brief conversation about that. A lot of times the content's already there. It's just that they don't even realize that it's there, and they need someone to help sift it out a bit and kind of figure out easy ways to produce it. And so some of that might mean, looking at the travel schedule of the executive with an executive assistant and seeing are there certain visits that they're making or trips that they're making that have, an interesting component to it for them to talk about.
One last thing I'll leave with everyone is this concept that it's a phrase that I love, that you automate what's important to you. So if social media is something that's of importance, you can automate that timing as far as at this day, at this time, I'm going to write this or I'm going to shoot this. And especially for executives, sometimes getting the content isn't the problem. Getting it out is the problem. So just getting it to the right person who can post for you or write that caption for you, because oftentimes as executives, you have the thought, you have the ideas, you have the content to share. It's just a matter of packaging it and getting it out to the world. So being able to just harness all the things that make you great and pass it off to teams that can get it out into the world.
Perfect. And I promised you, Lisa, you'd only have to suffer for 20 minutes. It's been 22. So I'm going to wrap it up there. And I appreciate it, Drew, Taylor, Lisa. We'll be back with more thought leadership in a little while.